Okay, good. We're recording now. That means I want absolute, no, you don't have to be quiet. If you have a question, ask it. So, biology. A whole bunch of biological things up here. Frogs, apples, maybe a ribeye. Anybody like ribeyes? Or you just like milk? I don't know. I like ribeyes myself. I'm what's called a super vegetarian. You know what a super vegetarian is? It's not a vegan. You know, a vegan is like, well, it's just not. Okay? A super vegetarian eats food in the form of really, really highly concentrated vegetation. That's in the form of a cow. Okay? Right. That's why I'm a super vegetarian. It takes a lot of vegetation to make a cow. Now, there's another thing going on here, too. You think, oh, well, the poor cow. Well, actually, you don't know how a cow thinks. The cow might be, the whole reason for being here is to provide food for humans. And if you're vegetarian, you're a bigot against a poor cow for not eating him. He feels left out. You know, he wants to be a ribeye. Maybe a brisket, I don't know. Sausage. You know, all that kind of stuff. So, and then how do you think plants feel? Like what? You can't, first of all, you have to understand, plants hate herbivores like that cow. Don't they? That cow is eating them. And they're wondering, how come we're, all these nice vegetarians who are floating around out here, they never think about how we're feeling as plants. Well, I don't know how plants feel, but they might, you know. They like Mozart, I hear. Versus, you know, well, it doesn't matter. So, heavy metal, they don't like heavy metal. They don't grow very well. So, that's another thing. I feel like we should be, if we actually eat herbivores, plants will like us better. Because we're actually killing their enemies. Okay? So, I just want you guys to understand this. I'm sure there are probably some vegetarians in here, but I want you to rethink your reasons for not eating meat. Because there are different constituencies here. There are plants, and there are animals, and they go about their business differently. And they usually don't like each other very much. Okay? So, I want to get that out of the way. Okay. How to do well in the class. Read the notes that are at the beginning of the chapters that we're covering. So there'll be, like I said, instead of having a book, there'll be little chapters that are 2 or 3 or 4 pages long. Let's see. Don't miss an exam, obviously. If you have to miss an exam, make sure I know about it so we can reschedule. I want, if your grandma dies, I really want her to die. Okay? I know that's kind of not really sensitive, but I'm tired of grandmas that weren't dead. You know, and they've come back to haunt me. You know, then I could eventually get arrested for actually killing your grandma, even though you said she was already dead. Well, I don't know. I just don't want to go through that mess. Okay. Okay. Any definitions of science? What do you think? It doesn't matter if you're wrong.
Formulation of ideas.
Formulation of ideas, supported by evidence. Good. Anything else? Yes?
Learning from our mistakes.
What's that?
Learning from mistakes.
Learning from mistakes.
Observation.
Observation. Okay. Yeah?
Understanding how and why things work.
Uh-huh.
And like how they work.
Right. So, one thing that often happens in science classes is a lot of facts. Facts are boring. First of all, anytime you think you're right, you stop looking. That's why a lot of things that we think we know, we really don't know. We just assume it. So, science is a systematic way of finding out about things in the world. Now, there are many, many different ways, epistemological ways of understanding the world. There's literature, there's history, there's humanities. Those things are important too. I'm not going to just say, oh, the only thing that counts is science and everything else that you're doing is just, oh, it's foo-foo. No, it's not, that's not true. Okay? We could, like Shakespeare. Anybody take a Shakespeare class or was introduced to Shakespeare in English? Right? Okay. Now, there's a play called Othello. This Moorish general, and he's a general of, I think, I don't know where it was, I forget, in Italy somewhere. And there's a person, a character in the play named Iago. Iago, we could call him a behavioral phenotype. He's a sociopath. Okay? I guarantee you, within this classroom, there's at least one sociopath. I want you to look around and start getting really scared. Okay? I don't have to worry because I've got a bodyguard. That guy, though, he's dangerous. We have to find out who it is.
What if he's?
What?
What if your bodyguard is?
Well, I picked wrong. But he probably won't knock me off. He'll just probably use me, right? Sociopaths are really good at using people. He could say, okay, I'm not going to kill you, but this is what I want. And, you know, I guess maybe, oh, he would probably want to increase his fitness, right? So he'd probably want me to help him increase his fitness. That would be really, well, I get fired for doing that. It just wouldn't be a good thing, but he doesn't care because he's a sociopath. But I know he's not a sociopath. This guy's a nice guy. I can tell. I just have to look in his eyes. So, Iago, we could reduce Iago, the sociopath, to what's called a behavioral phenotype. Now, you say, oh, a phenotype. What's a phenotype? That's a big word. It's basically, it includes your anatomy, physiology, behavior, development. Everything that is you is a behavioral phenotype. I said at one point that I used to be 6'2" with blonde hair and blue eyes. I had a different phenotype then. I've now shrunk way down. Okay? Now, every organism has a phenotype. So we're talking about a behavioral phenotype here, namely a sociopath. It's not like there's, oh, here's a sociopath and here's not a sociopath. It's not like that. It's a continuum, but people up towards the sociopathic scale, they don't have any sense of empathy in them at all. All they do is see other people to be used, and they usually end up either in jail or running a really big company. Okay? Being a sociopath can be really good for business. Okay? Because you're not letting emotion get in the way of advantage. I mean, business, the ecosystem of business, it's like a war out there. You win, They lose, they win, you lose, right? Okay, so the thing is, if you just look at Iago as a behavioral phenotype and not from a literary perspective, you'd be missing out on a whole lot. So I don't want you to say, oh, the only thing that counts is science. It doesn't. There's all sorts of different ways of understanding and knowing. I mean, I can tell you what a sociopath is, but you have to read or watch Othello to actually understand one in action. Yeah. And maybe, perhaps you can get by, you can make it through famines better than someone else, right? In fact, we'll get to this a little bit later, but everybody know here what type 2 diabetes is. So it's basically your cells, they produce insulin, but they're resistant to it, and you need insulin to actually burn the glucose, sugar. Okay. Now, if you actually took someone with diabetes today and put them back in the old days, they wouldn't be expressing diabetes. Food supplies were not reliable back then. There were always yearly intermittent famines, and sometimes there were really scary famines where almost everybody died. It turns out modern day diabetics were probably the ones that would actually survive because they have metabolisms, first of all, that hang on to as much energy as they can when there's times of plenty. And then they've got energy to burn where everybody else starts. So a nice skinny guy or skinny girl who's back in those days, in the old days, people used to think that women were beautiful when they had extra weight on. First of all, you need extra weight to have kids, but also the skinny ones died. You know, you don't want. I mean, it's the chances of losing a wife or a husband were pretty high anyway. Okay, so the reason I'm kind of bringing this up is that our lives depend on modern medical research. Really does. I'm sure anybody in this room ever gets so sick that if they didn't have antibiotics, they would have died? There's always a few. Yeah, I mean, I remember I once got strep. I would have been a goner. I mean, it was a full-on fulminating pneumonia within 2 days. It was like, if it wasn't for antibiotics, I'd be, my feet would be up in the air. And my hands would be up in the air and be all gone. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing this up is that funding in the United States, I guess this is a little political, funding in the United States for science is way down. That means there will be some of you that would probably be cured in the future, but you won't be now. It used to be like following World War II. The United States had the best science in the world because everybody funded it, no matter who, Republicans, Democrats, didn't matter. But it's not happening now. There's still some great stuff going on. We're going to learn about it, but it is, it's pretty serious. And that's just medical stuff. Physics. Now, a lot of stuff with physics, it's like particle physics, it's all theoretical. But it turns out a lot of that stuff is the basis for all our technology today. So, anytime someone comes along and says science isn't important, you should beat them up. Okay? I mean it. I just take a big 2x4. My bodyguard back there, he gets something bigger than a 2x4, I'm sure. Okay? And just say, you're an idiot. Because those people are. Okay. I'm not going to rant anymore about that. But we all are going to die, unfortunately. The only way you can actually live on into the future, of course, is to have offspring. But you know, it's just not the same. I mean, let's face it. You're happy about your kids, you love them, they're going to do great things. Your genes are living on, but you're not going to live on. I mean, I think it's a raw deal. Don't you? I mean, it's just a raw deal that we're all going to die. I mean, that just sucks. But I can't even really complain about it. Who do I complain to? You know? So, anyway, that's obviously, you can see why I might need therapy. But, luckily, I'm shallow, so I don't really need therapy. I just like to complain a lot. Okay. So, and I have here a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge that makes testable explanations. But really, what we're really talking about here is a method. That's all it is. Science, you think, well, what is science? Well, it does a lot of things. We can discover a lot of things. In fact, it's the best way to actually understand natural phenomena in the world today. Even if, in fact, it depends on people being wrong. Because if you're wrong, you can find out that you're wrong, and then you can keep exploring. Versus if people think that, oh, this is how it is. I'll give you a really good example. There's anybody in here ever have an ulcer? Okay. Do you know why you had an ulcer or not? Were you stressed out or was it something else?
Too much drinking.
Too much drinking. Oh, yeah, that'll work. Okay. Okay, that's good. It turns out, though, it used to be assumed that stress was basically, or too much drinking. And usually, if you're drinking a lot, you're not all that stressed out when you're drinking, but when you're not drinking, then you are stressed out. But maybe not. You just stay drunk all the time and everything's good. Oh, God, good grape. I just love grape. Okay, now, it was thought that the stomach environment was actually too toxic for microbes to actually live in. And so people just figured, well, now they never tested this. Partly because they didn't really have the technology. You know, now we can do scans for all sorts of different DNA, and we don't even have to be able to grow something in culture to know that, oh, there's this kind of organism, microbe in the gut or whatever. But it was thought that it was an inhospitable environment for some microorganisms to actually cause basically a lesion in the gut. Well, there was this Australian doctor who started uncovering a little evidence that he thought showed that, in fact, some kinds of ulcers are actually caused by microorganisms. In fact, he even found one, a pretty good candidate called Helicobacter pylori. Now, remember, at this time, it was assumed by everybody in the medical field that microbes did not cause ulcers. You were either crazy in your head with too much stress, or you were drinking too much, whatever. Are you still drinking that much?
Nope.
That's too bad. It was fun though, wasn't it? For a while.
For a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So, anyway, he started looking into it, and he actually thought, okay, I think this is what this Helicobacter bacteria is what's actually causing a lot of ulcers. So he needed to test it. Now the thing about science is you have to be able to test it in order, the only way to really test it is to be able to falsify it. That means to prove that it's wrong. In fact, in science, we never prove things right. They get to a point where we all agree that it's pretty right, like the Earth actually revolves around the sun and not the universe around the Earth. But basically science, you're trying to refute, let's say, your best idea. So, the idea at that time, the hypothesis was that bacteria don't cause ulcers. So he really couldn't make a nice potion full of this bacteria and have someone else drink it, so he drank it himself. He got a terrible case of gastritis by the next day, and then eventually got a Nobel Prize. Now this was all because scientists hadn't done due diligence. They assumed, because of inadequate knowledge, that you couldn't have microbial life living in the stomach. We certainly know that it lives in the lower intestine and the upper intestine, the small intestine. But it turns out, well, we're absolutely covered in bacteria. And we're covered in bacteria, and we're covered in fungi. In fact, there's more cells in us and on the outside of us than there are actual human cells in our body. You think that your whole reason for being here is so that, you're a human being. Well, actually, all you are is an ecosystem. You're providing habitat for a whole bunch of microbes to get around and move from one place to another. You think you're doing it all because you want to do it. Those microbes are making you do it. Everything that you do right now, you're even going to school just so you can, maybe turn some microbes over to someone else, right? So, just so you know, science is full of things like that. Scientists are just as likely to have mistakes or incorrect thinking as anybody else. The only good thing about it is that you can find out whether that's true or not, that you're actually wrong. That it's, in fact, great to be wrong, because it means that, I get to find something new out, instead of just believing what everybody has always believed. So even, and let's say you believe that ulcers in the past was all stress. Well, it turns out, now, scientists, why do they do this? They do it to figure things out. To figure out really what's going on. What the hell is really going on in the world in terms of natural phenomenon, even unnatural phenomenon. Okay, but if you're going down the wrong path, I guarantee you that, and you publish, someone else will come along and they will try to disprove you. Not because they're mean or anything, or they might be. It might be just because of ego, or it might be because they think, well, I think he's wrong here. So science, in a sense, is self-correcting. In fact, it depends on people being wrong. And that's not the end of it. That's the beginning of it. Every time you're wrong, you're ready to learn something new.
yourself, what is that beautiful house? You may ask yourself, where does that highway lead to? You may ask yourself, am I right? Am I wrong? You may say to yourself, my God, what have I done? Let in the days go by, let the water hold me down. Let in the days go by, water flowing underground. Into the blue again, after the money's gone. Once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. Into the blue again, into the silent water. Under the rocks and stone, there is water underground. Let in the days go by, into the silent water. Once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. Same as it ever was, 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 same as it ever was. Time isn't holding us, time isn't after us, time isn't holding us, time is a pony ride. Time isn't holding us, time isn't after us, time isn't holding us. Letting the days go by, letting the days go by, letting the days go by. Once in a lifetime, letting the days go by, letting the days go by, letting the days go by. Once in a lifetime.
Okay. Oh, why do we do science? We'll get to that in a second. Okay, let's get back with it. Okay, so, of course, the questions about why we do science, obviously practical. In fact, most people think that's why people do science. It's practical. We learn about things that then are useful to us, whether it's medical technology, physics and chemistry. There's a whole bunch of, there's like a revolution going on in material science right now. Chemists have a much better understanding of things, and they can design materials that do exactly what they want. And then ultimately, though, a lot of human beings are curious. They just want to figure out what the hell is going on. Now, some people like answers better than questions. I've always liked questions more than answers, but that's just me. Okay.
Now I'm going to discuss how we would look for new laws. In general, we look for new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guess is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare the computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience. Compare it directly with observations to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is, it doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess, or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it.
So, I want to tell you something. I'm brilliant. I am. I'm just so smart. It's amazing how often I've been wrong by being this brilliant. I've been wrong more times than I've been right by orders of magnitude. Now, he said being wrong, that's the most important. It is. You can never actually prove anything beyond a shadow of a doubt. But you can try. You can start out with, little pinpricks into the explanation, which is a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis or a theory, a scientific one, is different than, oh, it's just a theory, which is pretty much an opinion. A real scientific hypothesis is you're able to actually prove that it's wrong. And it's a great thing when you prove that it's wrong, because it means you don't have to worry about that explanation anymore. You can go on to something else. But eventually, you want to really test it as rigorously as possible. You basically want to take a nuclear weapon and try to blow the hell out of it, out of your favorite explanation. That's what you want to do. Now, you test hypotheses by predictions that different hypotheses make. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Why did it fall to the ground? That's what you read. It's not true. Yeah, it turns out that this is my explanation. In fact, it was actually the explanation of people in California in the 40s. It was, California has always been full of weird cults. A lot of people at that point believed that there are these metalhead guys at the center of the earth with big heads and magnetic heads. And that's why things didn't go floating off into space. That's the reason for gravity. They swore they were right. They'd seen them. What were they taking? So, these people believe that. Now, if this was true, you would say, okay, we've got these metal-headed people, gravity's because of magnetism, and what does magnetism work on in terms of what kind of material does it work on? Metal. Okay? So, what's the way to disprove this hypothesis? What?
Like plants don't have, some items or some things don't have metal in it, so how come they're not?
Like us, unless we've got a metal hip or something. Right. In that simple way, I just disproved that hypothesis, that in fact, there are metal beings, imaginary, that are causing gravity. Because gravity is not magnetism. Magnetism, electromagnetism, is one of the four forces of the universe, but it's not gravity. It's affected by gravity. So, that's what we do in science. We have an observation, like I just did, dropped it on the floor. Someone goes, why did that happen? It was Isaac Newton, of course. He saw an apple fall. Well, it was interesting. He wondered, kind of crazy that, why would you even think of it? How come the apple just doesn't fly off to the side? That's what he actually thought. How come it doesn't do that? How come it's falling down? He didn't know what gravity was, but he showed that, in fact, it existed, and it acted in a very specific way in terms of mass. And he wrote all these equations and explained the universe and how bodies in motion travel and all that kind of stuff. But he asked a question that most people don't even think about. They wouldn't, of course it falls, it always falls. He thought, how come it's falling? How come it just doesn't fly off somewhere? And it almost seems like a stupid question, what he asked. Yet it was brilliant. And in fact, we still use Newtonian physics to this very day. It's accurate enough for rockets going off into space and spacecraft going to Mars and figuring out how to get there based on his idea of gravity. It wasn't until later, of course, that his hypothesis or theory of gravity was incorrect. It wasn't totally incorrect. In fact, it actually made predictions that are useful in terms of how we view the solar system and the universe. But it was missing some stuff until Mr. Einstein came along. And he had an even sillier idea. What would it look like if he was a photon traveling at the speed of light? And he originally came up with this idea of special relativity, and then general relativity, which tied in gravity. And that it turns out that time, now we all know that time is subjective. Things that you hate doing last the longest. Things that you like to do the most, they just whiz by. Okay, but he was talking a little bit different. It turns out time is not a constant. In fact, there is a different time between my head and my toe right now. Time is moving more slowly up here, more slowly up here, and more quickly down there, and that's why I get dizzy. Okay? That's because of Einstein. It's true. It's true. So, now Mr. Einstein is probably wrong too, or incorrect. Sometimes with a theory, if they're really wrong, we prove that it's wrong, like this guy was named Feynman, Richard Feynman. He was a physicist at Caltech. When he was 19 years old, he was working on the atom bomb at Los Alamos during World War II. He was, one of those brilliant kids. He got his PhD by the time he was 14. Don't you just hate people like that? Yeah. Anyway, absolutely brilliant fellow with a great sense of humor, too. And many, many interests. Sometimes scientists get this idea, that people get an idea that they can't walk and move their arms at the same time. They're just so focused on what they're doing. But no, he's brilliant. But everything that we think we know is probably incorrect at some point. That's just the way it is. But our explanations are, what seems to be true is those are conditional explanations. That means, for the time being, we think this is a good explanation for what we're seeing. That explanation makes predictions that we can then test by doing experiments, doing observations. But It's only conditional because anytime there's new information that comes along, you can either, if the information is really at odds with it, you have to toss out the whole theory, no matter how beautiful it is. Or it needs modification. Einstein said there's a speed limit, speed of light. That's a constant, supposedly. Nothing can go faster than that. If someone came along and proved that something went faster than the speed of light, it would be a revolution. In fact, someone actually did that about 5 years ago. They really should have just kept their mouth shut until they were absolutely sure. But they ran a particle from, I think it was in the Netherlands to Switzerland, and it got there before it should have. If it had been true, we'd be talking about a new physics right now. But it turns out you have to be careful about these sorts of things. It turns out their equipment was faulty. They had a faulty switch somewhere. And so it showed something that wasn't actually true. Yeah?
When that happened, it was actually that, like, they had the miscalculation, they weren't finished, like, looking it over, and
Yeah.
the news media just, like, picked it up for no reason.
I know. They said it's probably wrong.
Yeah,
In fact, is what they did.
The news talked about it for like a month after.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. If you come across something like that, you better be really damn sure. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be wrong. That's being fine. But I'd cover my ass a little bit. You know what I mean? But people at that doctor about the microbes and ulcers, they laughed at him. They wouldn't even listen to him at first. But finally, a few people did, and they reproduced his experiments. And lo and behold, it was true. Same thing happened. Anybody know what? Let's see. What is it? Plate tectonics. Anybody know what plate tectonics is? Yeah. What is it?
They're
Yeah.
masses of land that connect together
Mhm.
that are the world.
And they're moving.
They're moving.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Continents are moving. Like, that's not something that's intuitive. That's counterintuitive. It looks like continents are here to stay, right? Well, this guy named Wegener in the early 1900s proposed, all he did was look at a map, of course, and he saw that, well, Africa and South America seemed like they fit together, but now they're apart. And people started finding fossils on one side in South America that were identical to fossils in Africa on the other side. How do you explain that? So he proposed, he didn't have a mechanism yet, he didn't understand about seafloor spreading and plates. It turns out that, continents are actually the light material. The heavy material is underneath it that's actually moving around. Well, it took until the 60s before there was any evidence, but people laughed at him. They said, oh, you're just cracked, right? Turns out he was right. But, he was just about laughed off the face of the planet. Now, of course, he's famous, right? So, let's see, what time? We should probably take a little break. Yeah, okay, we'll take a little break. We'll say 10 minutes. This is essentially the scientific method. We have an observation. The car won't start. Why the hell why does it not start? Because it's mad at me. That's a hypothesis. It is. You can say, oh, the car won't start because it's mad at me. That's my explanation. Someone else, you get it towed into the place where they're gonna work on it, it starts right up. Doesn't that happen all the time? Mad at me. But you may say, well, I mean, that's not a real hypothesis. Actually, it is. It makes a prediction, doesn't it, that you could actually falsify. Turns out you can falsify it. It probably won't start for someone else either. So, you get rid of that hypothesis, you come up with another one. Hypotheses, explanations, they're a dime a dozen. I don't care how wacky an explanation is. In fact, I like to since come up, I just, I like to create crazy hypotheses, just for the hell of it. It amuses me. So if you, let's say, you want to come up and you think, okay, here's a really crazy hypothesis. No one's going to think badly, well, someone might think badly about you, but I think there's someone who's got an imagination. So, let's start with this though. Why won't the car start? Well, the car doesn't like me. Maybe it's a dead battery. Maybe there's no fuel in the gas tank. All valid hypotheses. We'll start with the battery. Now, you can then make a prediction. If it is a battery, how can you show that, in fact, it's the battery and not something else? Well, the prediction is, if you replace the battery, the car will start. That's how a lot of doctors actually treat disease. They don't necessarily know exactly what it is, but it looks like, let's say, it looks like an infectious disease. They put someone on antibiotics, and it goes away. So then they probably have a fairly good idea of what kind of disease it was, or it might not go away, right? Sometimes they treat to diagnose. A diagnosis is strictly a hypothesis. If the hypothesis is correct, then the car will start. You put the battery in, there it goes. Okay? And the battery is replaced. The dead battery hypothesis is supported. Now, you might go back again later, and the car won't start again. Might still be a battery, it might be a faulty battery, it might be what other reason. If in fact it wasn't the battery, so we replace the battery and it still wouldn't start, we have falsified that hypothesis. In science, that's what we want to do. We want a hypothesis that you can test and you can disprove. You can never really prove, because you might not be accounting for things that are running around out there, but you can certainly show that something is not true. So then, you go up and you propose a new hypothesis. Say, oh, it's, let's see, I bet you I know what it is. Rats got in my engine compartment and ate up all the wires. Happened to me once. God, I relive it. But I killed them all. I felt so good. If you ever go up to like Mineral King and the Sequoias and the Sierras, they have marmots up there, and marmots love. They even have signs up there about if your car doesn't start, it's probably the marmots who got in the compartment and ate up all the wiring. They just love little wires and stuff. So, of course, hypotheses come from, well, they can come from observation. You know, you see something out there and you think, why is that so? They can come just because you're curious about something. You don't necessarily have to see anything, but you're curious about something. Now, are these all hypotheses? The universe revolves around the Earth. Is that a hypothesis?
No.
Yes, it is. A hypothesis doesn't mean it's a right hypothesis.
I thought you could phrase it as a question.
No, a hypothesis is an explanation. The question is, I asked you, oh, that's right, you're right, it's a question, okay. It's deciding what to wear based on the weather, so I'm asking questions, but can you propose a hypothesis for this?
Oh, okay.
So, we'll say the earth revolves around, the universe revolves around the earth, that's a hypothesis. Okay? We've been able to disprove that, so, but it's still a hypothesis, it's just been refuted. When you go outside, do you wear the clothes, do you pick the clothes depending on the weather? Right? So I look outside, oh, it's hot today, I think I'll wear a trench coat. Right? Or I'll go out and say, oh, it's going to be cold today, and then I wear a trench coat and it's 95 out. Those are hypotheses. What's the fastest way to get from let's say you live in Glendale to here? Well, you have an idea, probably legacy, like you've probably been going the same route all the time. You might change the route a little bit depending on what time of day. But how would you actually test that hypothesis about the fastest way to get from Glendale to here at, let's say, 4 in the morning?
An experiment,
Okay, what will you do?
drive there.
Mm-hmm. Would it just be one car? How many?
At least 2 or 3.
Yeah?
Try different, try a car, maybe like train or bus, it depends.
Uh-huh.
And then see which one is faster.
Okay.
Try different methods.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so different methods. You could also, of course, say, okay, at 4 in the morning, the freeway is probably fine, but at 7 or 8 in the morning, maybe there's a faster way on surface streets. Okay. Now to test that, probably what you want to do is you want to hold everything equal except for the one thing that you're actually testing. So we'll say at 4 in the morning, we're just going to say, what's the fastest way to get there at 4 in the morning? And you're going to probably get more than it's 2 or 3. Because you've never been to a race. It's much more fun to go to a race with a lot of people, trying to get there as quickly as possible. So we'll say 25. Now, each one of these is a replicate. In fact, it would be nice if they'd have the exact same car, the exact same driver, but as long as you had a sample size that's large enough, because let's say you did it just once, and I was the one who was going to test it. And so it's 4 in the morning, I'm a little sleepy, I get a cup of coffee, I shoot some methadone, that wakes me up, I step on the gas, and I crash. Right? So that wouldn't necessarily be a representative sample of a normal driver. We want to get an idea for a normal driver. So we get a whole bunch of different people, but driving the same car. And we try them on this route by the freeway, then we try them on the route by the surface streets, and we see which one is actually fastest. We find at 4 in the morning, it takes you 12 minutes and 35 seconds on average to get from Glendale to here. That's pretty fast. I don't know if we could do it quite that fast, but we'll say that. Then you do it, you say, okay, time of day is probably a variable that's going to affect how fast I can get from Glendale to this school. So we'll do it at 8 in the morning as well. And we find out, of course, it takes 42 minutes to get from Glendale to here at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so now we want to find out, is there a faster way? So we start planning routes out. Now, of course, with technology, it's great. You just go to your local internet thing, and it shows you which roads are all plugged up and which ones are open. And then you talk to Siri, and she picks the route for you, and that's it. You find out. Okay? But you're actually making hypotheses. The hypothesis is that at 8 in the morning, it's probably better to go these surface streets, Riverside Drive to whatever. Okay? That's a hypothesis. You can disprove it. You can find a route that's quicker. And you say, oh, this is a better route. Okay? So, hypothesis testing. You have to set up an experiment. Now, sometimes you can't set up an experiment. Sometimes you have historical data, like evolutionary data, things that happened long, long ago. And if it was a perfect world, what you would do is you'd take the Earth and you'd recreate it, let's say 100 times, set the conditions exactly the same, and see what happens. And run it forward. But we can't do that. But it's like trying to solve a crime after something has already been committed. So you walk into your apartment, there's the window shattered, oh, someone's broken into my apartment. Then you look around, oh, there's a baseball, right? New hypothesis. But you actually can't go back and recreate it. I guess you could see, oh, we'll redo this again and see if we can get a baseball to go through the window. But that kind of gives you can, with observation and not controlling an experiment, you can still get a fairly reasonable answer. You can still disprove things. Okay. So mainly the most important thing here, first of all, should we look for evidence to confirm it? Anybody? Or should we look, is that the best way to do it? Look for, why not?
Because you want to look for the evidence that makes it false or disproven.
Exactly. There's confirmation bias a lot of times. We expect certain things to happen. The ulcer thing, well, people didn't even look. They just expected, oh, it's not microbes, it's something, it's a stress. Okay? What you want to do is you want to be able to disprove something. And if you can't disprove it, after you really try to blow the hell out of it, so then you have a pretty good idea that there might be some truth to it. But to actually test things, you have to set up an experiment or an observational experiment where it's possible to prove it's wrong, falsifiability. That's the secret to science. Not going out and looking for evidence that supports your great idea, but going out and looking for evidence that does the contrary. That shows that, oh, your great idea isn't so great after all. If you really want to get to the truth of things, if you just want to get famous or something, well, it might fly for 50 years, but eventually you'll be found out, right? Okay. There is, a lot of times you hear in the media or people say, oh, it's only a theory. It's just a theory. A scientific theory is not just a theory. Just a theory is what's called a conjecture that may be somewhat supported or not. Might be a wild guess. You can start out with a hypothesis that way, but a real scientific theory is a different animal. A hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis is a different animal. It means that you can disprove it. Okay? If you can prove it's wrong, you can falsify it, then that's a real theory. And when an explanation that you have, that explanation makes certain predictions that you can actually test to see whether they're true or not. back to getting from Glendale to here at 4 in the morning. You predict that the freeway is the fastest way, and then you go out and you test it. Freeway, not just the freeway, but then you have to test it to something else. You might test 3 other routes. So 3 alternative hypotheses. One of them, and if you replicate it with enough individual tests, you'll get a good idea of possibly what might be true. You haven't explored all of the possible ways to get there. You might have missed something, but out of the ones that you tested, you'll find which one has the most support. Now, a theory is even more. First of all, a theory usually explains more than just one specific hypothesis. A theory is like the theory of gravity, which is general relativity. Einstein's theory of relativity makes these very, very, very specific predictions about how gravity affects matter and how mass affects time. Makes all these predictions that you can go out and test. And so far, people have gone out. The first thing that he hypothesized, what time is it, by the way? It's getting late. Okay, we have to go, well, we're at 1:45, right? Oh, good, we have so much time. Isn't that great? I love it. Okay. So, Einstein's theory of relativity makes all these predictions. The first one that they could really test was his theory predicted that light would be bent when it passed next to a massive object, whether it was a star or whatever. And that you could actually see how much it was bent. And the only way to do it actually was to go and look at a solar, what is it? Solar eclipse, a full one. Anybody ever seen a solar eclipse? The kind where there's just a big hole in the sky, or just partial? Anyway, the next one is in 2017. Go to the Grand Tetons, it'll be amazing. That was the way that they could actually predict it at that time. Now that we've got much better methods for doing it. But it turns out they sent these expeditions. I think the expedition for the next solar eclipse was in 1920, and it was someplace far away that was difficult to get to. And the team that took the measurements, they really didn't, it was just a little too ragged. And so it looked like they thought maybe they had refuted Einstein's hypothesis. But then there was another one a couple of years later, and it stood out. It said, oh, exactly the light will be shifted this much depending on how massive the object is, and in this case, this is the sun. And since then, every time people have tried to refute Einstein's hypothesis, they haven't been able to. Doesn't mean that Einstein's hypothesis is absolutely the true picture of the universe. But it means at this point it's the best explanation that we have. It replaced Newton's hypothesis of the universe. Newton's is actually good enough for practical things like space travel, but it's not good enough in terms of what's really going on. It turns out the faster you move towards the speed of light, space-time actually shrinks. Time slows down, space actually becomes smaller. Very weird stuff. So when anybody ever says, oh, it's just a theory, just ask them what's a theory and see if they can answer it. And if they say it's just, oh, it's just, like an opinion, they say, that's not a theory. It's not. Okay, So what we do is we have an observation or a question, and then we have a model or a hypothesis. And a hypothesis makes predictions, just like with a battery. The car won't start. Why won't it start? Well, it won't start because it's a dead battery. Can you test that? Can you show that that's not true? Yes, you can. That's all we do. And then we want to test it as often as possible and in different ways, because sometimes there's many predictions that you can actually, sometimes like in certain situations, ecology is a study of organisms and how they interact with the environment. Well, sometimes multiple things are going on at the same time. So not all hypotheses are mutually exclusive. But in terms of physics, like we were just talking about, those were mutually exclusive hypotheses or theories. So a theory fails even if one key prediction is falsified. Like if you actually found out that you could get something to go faster than the speed of light, then Einstein's theory of general relativity would be out the window. There might be parts of it you could save, but pretty much that's a key piece of evidence and a prediction. And if you could just falsify that, you'd have to start pretty much from scratch. So, is science robust? That means, is it rigorous enough to determine if a hypothesis or theory is incorrect? What do you guys think?
Well, you can never truly prove if something's correct or not.
Yeah, but can you prove something's incorrect? Well, the battery thing I could just easily prove, right? That it's incorrect.
But there's like an infinite number of
Well, yeah.
possibilities.
Well, no, there is. But if you find one thing, I mean, you can pretty much, if you, there's a key prediction from a hypothesis, and you can show that it's wrong, that's pretty strong evidence that it's wrong. Now, you're right, there can be, if you have, let's say, a couple of different explanations for something that's actually going on, and they're not mutually exclusive, then you're right. But for the most part, science is so strong because you can disprove things. It's as simple as that. You may not be able to disprove something. The belief that something is such and such a way may go on for hundreds of years. But science, because people are going to be testing it, I mean, there's certain things that we can't test right now. String theory. You've probably heard about that in terms of physics. And the trouble is, there's not just one string theory. There's hundreds of them. Some have 6 dimensions. Some have 15 dimensions. At this point, we don't have a way to actually differentiate between those things. So, in a sense, string theory is a theory, but it's really not a real scientific theory at this point because you really can't test it. It doesn't mean that it might be, yes?
Is it like quantum physics, where it's like, it's there but you can't?
Quantum field theory is a theory, yeah. But it's got a lot of evidence to support it. Okay? But it makes all sorts of predictions. It's called a standard model. And it explains that there are particles that go with different forces. So quarks are a kind of particle, and there's different kinds of quarks that go into forming neutrons and an electron is actually a kind of a quark, protons, that sort of stuff. It also makes very specific predictions about, like, quantum field theory. Well, when they talk about field, gravity is a force field. We don't really quite realize it. It's not like gravity over here is causing something over there that's smaller to revolve around it. It doesn't actually work that way. The force of gravity extends all over everything. The same thing for electromagnetism, one of the other forces. Electromagnetism is part of quantum field theory. It's quantum electrodynamics is what it's called. So, now quantum theory is pretty good, but the one problem that quantum field theory and relativity, in terms of gravity, there's a problem there. One, quantum field theory works on very, very small distances. Electromagnetism is very small, from how far it is from different energy levels of electrons. The weak force, which governs radioactive decay, and the strong force, which keeps the nucleus together. And this particle that goes with that is called a gluon. Anyway, the trouble is, quantum field theory does not explain quantum gravity. Gravity extends over billions of light years, millions of miles, right? Quantum stuff happens on a very small scale. The thing is, when the universe started, the Big Bang, it was a very, very, very small universe. That means that there was gravity there. But it wasn't, there's no way to actually know what that gravity looked like, because normally gravity is a force that extends, a macro force. And so the real problem now is trying to find a theory that incorporates what's called quantum gravity. That's what physicists are up against. And they've been up against it for a long time now. So,
We count.
You what?
Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Let's say this desert ant wants to go here for lunch. Because she's in the desert, there is no scent trail, so how does our little ant find her way home?
I know.
Well, some German and Swiss scientists think that ants have
pedometers in their brains.
Yeah.
Meaning maybe there are brain cells inside a desert ant that record every step the ant takes as she walks out.
6, 7, 8, 9.
And then when it's time to go home, they just reverse and count backwards.
5, 4, 3.
It's a nice idea, but how do you prove it? Okay, scientists designed an ingenious experiment.
Yeah.
Yes, which lets us literally see these pedometers at work. So we'll take an ant, we'll call it...
Ant number 1.
Okay, so ant number 1, we want to watch you take 10 steps to the food source.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And then 10 steps home.
10, 9, 8, 10, 11, 12.
Now, could you just go back to the apple?
Okay.
Thank you. Now, ant number 2. She also marched to the food source, but when she got there, they grabbed her and superglued little pig bristles. They're kind of like stilts. So now she's a much taller ant, and therefore every step she takes will be that much longer. Careful, careful.
Is this absolutely necessary?
And finally, ant number 3. She also walks 10 steps to the food. Again, they grab her. This time they do something a little gruesome.
What do you mean gruesome?
We're cutting your legs off at the knees.
What?
Sometimes we've all got to make small sacrifices for science, so because your legs are now much smaller, From now on, every step you take will be much shorter.
I feel all stumpy.
Okay, now comes the fun part. When everybody was ready, the ants were released, off they go, and here's what happened. The stilty ant, she walked 10 steps home and stopped.
I'm out.
No, you're not.
What?
Because each of her steps is now so much longer, she'd gone right past the entrance.
What the?
The stumpy ant, she also walked 10 steps home and stopped.
I'm home.
But because each of her steps is now so much shorter, she only got part way back.
I want my legs back.
Sorry. And the last ant who was left alone, she gets home
I'm home.
with no problem, strongly suggesting that all these ants were somehow counting their steps. And just in case you're not convinced, that same day scientists move all 3 groups of ants back into the nest for the night. And the next day, all the ants were marched off to get food using their new legs. The stumpies took lots of steps. The stilties took fewer steps. The regulars took regular steps. And when it was time to come home, all the ants, all 3 groups went straight home. Their pedometers apparently had adjusted to their new leg size. So ants, it really seems hard to avoid this conclusion,
I'm home.
do have pedometers in their heads, or another way to say it is...
Ant town. I want my legs back.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
So, who in here is lousy at science? You can say that, okay, good. I feel sorry for you. No. First of all, well, a lot of people are probably really math phobic. So you don't have to do very much of that, that's for sure. But science is actually pretty cool. If I start just giving you facts, you might as well just be an accountant or something. Well, sorry, there's probably accountant people in here, and they're going to make a lot more money than I am, so it's okay, you can be an accountant. But there's a lot of classes, you just get facts. Well, a scientific fact might be kind of cool. Some of them are. A lot of them are. But facts are not discovery. Discovery is really exciting stuff. And so if you can keep your mind open, and if I start just spewing facts at you, well, I'm going to need my bodyguard, because otherwise you'll all come after me. Or you'll just be falling asleep in your seats, and I don't want that. I'm trying to get a nice little comedy routine that I can take on the road so I can actually make some money. So obviously if people are falling asleep on me, I'm in trouble. But I think everybody in this class should be able, they put in a little bit of effort to do well and to perhaps enjoy what science is and how it actually works. So, let's see where we're at. Okay. More of the scientific method. We actually use it almost every day. We don't necessarily use it in a rigorous sense, though. So, I'll give you an example. Let's say we're back to driving from Glendale to here. Why do you take that route? Well, you haven't tested it. Maybe someone told you, oh, this is the route to take, and so you always take that route. It's like a legacy. It's history. You do the same thing over and over again just because of history. It may be that there's a better way to do it, but you haven't found it. You just do history over and over again. So sometimes we actually do science every day. My computer won't say. Just figuring out why things are not happening. Usually with the computer go, instead of like the car battery, usually you just throw up your hands and start, whining. And then eventually you take it to some computer place. They charge you an arm and a leg, like those poor little ants, and it's a lot of money, and they don't necessarily fix it. So, but normally we do the same sort of thing. We see something, we need for a practical reason, and we come up with an explanation. That's what a hypothesis is. The hypothesis will make a prediction. In this computer example, we'll say the battery again. But if you plug it in, then it should start. Or if you put a new battery in, then it should start too. Okay? And then, of course, let's say you can reject the hypothesis. Let's say it's not the battery. It's easy to find out. Yes or no. The prediction is upheld. Looks like it's battery. Okay. So we actually use the scientific method throughout our lives, but not always rigorously, because who wants to go out to Glendale, get all your friends together in the same sort of car, and drive at 4 o'clock in the morning from there to here, and then on different routes? And to say, oh, we already know. Well, you might be missing out on, actually, there's a much faster route. It's called a helicopter. Okay, so let's just see this. Okay, Scientific hypothesis, well, it's based on observations, or it's based on something that you know about. You might not have exactly seen it yourself. It proposes an explanation. That's what a hypothesis is. That's why I mentioned a hypothesis. They're a dime a dozen. And they're a dime a dozen because, so what if you're wrong? As long as you can find out you're wrong, you just go on to another explanation. That's why Feynman, that Caltech Nobel Prize winner that we saw earlier, he said, guess. Well, most scientists would not say, no, guess. You should have, it should be an educated guess. But really, like I said, you could come up with the craziest ass hypothesis out there like I did with the keys. So what? I didn't have to even do an experiment. I just logically disproved it. Because not only do the keys not take off, but you don't float up out of your seats either. Okay, so what is a good experiment? I mentioned that with the car experiment, someone mentioned we could have different kinds of cars, different kinds of drivers, different routes. The thing is, all those things, if you did them all together, it would get very messy. It would be hard to separate out. Now, they all might affect, actually, how fast it takes, or how long it takes you to get from one place to the next. But let's say you wanted to know, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we're proposing that using the freeway from, let's say, 101 to 405 to here is the fastest way. Okay? Everything else should then, when we run this experiment, should be the same. We should have the same car, or the same cars, and everybody takes off at roughly the same time. And we should also have drivers that are roughly the same skill set. Okay? Like in your previous life, you wouldn't be one of the drivers. You should only drink and drive when you have a car. Okay? Also, you should only drink and drive when you're in no condition to walk. That's also a further truth. I've discovered that, so you know. Now, so we're just going to take one variable and we're going to test it. We're going to say, we're going to hold everything equal at 4 in the morning, same cars, but we're going to have two different routes. One the freeway and one surface streets. Okay? That means everything else is constant except for the one variable we're actually testing. So we have the freeway, and then we'll say we have a control. If we just have the freeway and we do that, that'll tell us, well, it takes, on average, this long to get from one place to another, but it doesn't tell you anything about, is there a faster way. And then, of course, you want to minimize bias, so you want to make sure that all the cars are the same. So they're all, let's see, BMW S-Class cars. Instead of, one person is driving along in a 1930s Ford truck, another one is using a Lamborghini, another one, well, that's a lot of noise that you're feeding into the whole experiment. If you want to find out which car goes the fastest, will get there the fastest, then that's fine. Then you use 5 Lamborghinis, you use 5 old Fords, you use a Pinto, whatever it is, but that's a different question. And then, of course, there's stats. Statistical analysis of, what was that thing that, it was Mark Twain who said something about stats. Anyway, there are stats that are reliable. But if someone says, well, 48% of these people believe this, and 37 believe this, but there's actually no variation, you need to actually address whether those are different in terms of proportions of people believing one thing or another. You actually need, on what's called, you have to test the variance around that. So it's unlikely that everybody is going to believe exactly the same thing. So that's why you do multiple tests, like with the cars. You do it over and over and over again, and then you get a mean, but you not only the mean or the average, but you get the variation around it. So we often say we're going to test two different groups, the treatment group and the control group. So let's say we're talking about, let's see, I think we're almost done. We'll see. Yeah, 5 minutes, okay. I'll wrap this up. So, we're testing a new drug. We want to know if it's, let's say, safe. So, we give this drug in a capsule form, and then we give another group with so many individuals, let's say 100 individuals in each group. They also get a capsule that looks exactly the same. Does it taste any different? Nothing like that. They can't actually tell whether one actually has the new drug in it or one has a placebo, nothing in it. And then we test, that's how we test it. Now, if we just gave the capsule with the drug to one group and then didn't give anything to the other group, we would be testing apples and oranges. To actually test things so that everything is equal, you have to give both groups exactly the same thing, but just with the fact that one has a capsule with a drug in it and one has something else in it that is not a drug, but seems to be just like the drug. Okay? Now, a lot of times, instead of just having one and a placebo, they'll take a new drug, and they'll take an old drug, or two old drugs, and you'll see, does this new drug have better chance of curing someone of small cell carcinoma compared to these older drugs? On average, how many months of extra life does it add to people with small cell carcinoma? And then, depending on how big the sample size is, you can say, oh, this will add so many months on to the average person's life. It's, of course, an average person really isn't an average, it's a conglomeration. It'll actually cure some people, and it won't have any effect on others. But it might be a better drug, depending on the kind of cancer they have and the kind of mutations they have, compared to some of the older treatments. So in that case, you're actually comparing alternate hypotheses, a whole bunch of different drug treatments. Okay? That'll do it.